Hello, and welcome back to Jaed English Center. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we have a very special story for you, one that changed the world forever. We're going to dive into the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer, a man often called the father of the atomic bomb. But who was he, really? Was he a hero, a villain, or something much more complex? We'll explore his brilliant mind, his secret mission during World War II, and the incredible, and sometimes terrifying, events that led to one of the most important scientific discoveries in history. This is a fantastic opportunity to improve your English. As we read, we'll focus on key vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. This is a level 3 story, so it's perfect for intermediate learners who want to challenge themselves and learn something fascinating at the same time. So, get ready to learn, listen, and discover. Let's begin the real story of Oppenheimer. He was a man of staggering contradictions. A poet who could read sacred Hindu texts in the original Sanskrit, and the physicist who built the most destructive force humanity has ever known. He was a celebrated national hero, the father of the atomic bomb, only to be publicly shamed, accused of disloyalty, and thrown into political exile. This is the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer, a genius who handed humanity the power to wipe itself off the map. But the man who famously became death, the destroyer of worlds, would be haunted by his creation. It sparked a personal and ethical battle that would define his true legacy. This is the story of a brilliant, arrogant, and deeply fragile man who led a top-secret race to build the world's most terrifying weapon, only to face his greatest challenge long after the bomb fell, a fight for his own soul, and for the future of a world he had changed forever. J. Robert Oppenheimer's story doesn't start in the New Mexico desert. It begins in a world of staggering wealth and intellect in New York City. Born on April 22, 1904, to a wealthy German Jewish family, young Robert grew up in an apartment on Riverside Drive that was less a home and more a private art gallery, decked out with paintings by Picasso, Vuillard, and even 3 original Van Goghs. His father, Julius, was a successful textile importer, and his mother, Ella, was a painter with a gentle, artistic soul. But all that culture and money came with intense pressure and isolation. His mother was overprotective, instilling in her son a deep-seated germophobia that kept him away from other kids. He was a lonely child, preferring the company of books and his mineral collection to his peers. He later admitted he lacked a sensitiveness to human beings in his youth, a trait that often came across as aloofness or a sharp intellectual arrogance. And intellectually, he was a true prodigy. At the Ethical Culture Society School, he devoured knowledge, chemistry, physics, Latin, Greek, excelled at everything. His mind moved at a dizzying pace. He could pick up new languages in months, mastering Dutch in just 6 weeks for a lecture, and later, learning Sanskrit just to read the Hindu classics as they were written. He entered Harvard in 1922 and graduated with high honors in only 3 years. But this brilliance was shadowed by a profound emotional instability. He suffered from bouts of deep depression and a restless energy that a friend later described as a lack of Sitzfleisch, literally sitting flesh, the ability to just sit still and work through a problem. Oppenheimer's mind was a racehorse, but his emotional state was a fragile mess. That fragility reached a terrifying point when he moved to Cambridge University in England. He hated the tedious work of experimental physics at the Cavendish laboratory. His depression spiraled, It was during this dark period in 1925 that one of the most infamous and debated incidents of his life occurred. The story goes that, feeling belittled by his tutor, Patrick Blackett, Oppenheimer allegedly left a poisoned apple on his desk. Whether it was laced with cyanide or something less deadly is still debated by historians, and the entire event may well be apocryphal, but whatever the truth, the supposed intent was horrifying. Fortunately, Blackett never ate the apple. When the university found out, it was only his father's influence that saved him from expulsion and criminal charges. His psychiatrist reportedly diagnosed him with dementia precox, an early term for schizophrenia, a diagnosis that hints at the severity of his inner turmoil. He was a man at war with himself, once confessing to his brother, Frank, "I need physics more than friends." The turning point came when he finally escaped the lab work of Cambridge for the University of Göttingen in Germany, the world's epicenter for theoretical physics. There, among giants like Max Born and Werner Heisenberg, Oppenheimer finally found his home. In the abstract world of quantum mechanics, his mind could soar. He earned his PhD in 1927 at just 23 years old. With a dissertation so brilliant, one of his examiners later confessed he was too intimidated to question him on it. He was back in his element, a celebrated mind in the most exciting field of science. But the shadows of his arrogance and insecurity would follow him, shaping the man destined to change the world. Asterisk when Oppenheimer returned to the States. In the late 1920s, he was a different man. No longer the struggling student, he was now a star in the world of theoretical physics. He took on joint professorships at UC Berkeley and Caltech, building the most respected school of theoretical physics in America. His students called him Oppie, a nickname that was part affection, part reverence. He was famous for his lectures, delivered through a cloud of cigarette smoke, and for his brutal honesty, once telling a student simply, "You're stupid." For years, Oppenheimer lived in a self-imposed political bubble. He claimed he was so detached from the world that he didn't even hear about the 1929 stock market crash until months after it happened. He didn't read newspapers. He didn't own a radio. His world was quantum mechanics, cosmic rays, and the death of stars, a concept that would later become known as black holes, which he was one of the first to theorize. But the world outside his ivory tower couldn't be ignored. The 1930s brought the Great Depression and the rise of Nazism. As a Jewish intellectual, he watched in horror as scientists he knew were forced to flee Europe. He began donating part of his salary to help relatives escape Nazi Germany. His political conscience was waking up. This awakening was driven by the women in his life. In 1936, he started a passionate, stormy relationship with Jean Tatlock, a brilliant and troubled psychoanalysis student at Stanford and an active member of the Communist Party. She didn't just introduce him to the poetry of John Donne. She pulled him into a world of left-wing causes and fundraisers for the Spanish Republic, a political circle that would later be used as a weapon against him. In 1939, he met Catherine Kitty Poynting Harrison, a biologist and former Communist Party member. Kitty was married when they met, but their connection was electric. She divorced her husband and married Oppenheimer in 1940. Their marriage was difficult. Kitty struggled with alcoholism and depression, but she remained a fierce and steadfast presence through his greatest triumphs and darkest days. Through Tatlock, Kitty, his brother Frank, and many of his Berkeley students, Oppenheimer was surrounded by communist sympathies. He attended meetings and donated to causes championed by the party. on a security questionnaire for the Manhattan Project. He'd later admit he had been a member of just about every Communist Front organization on the West Coast. For Oppenheimer, this was less about Soviet ideology and more about fighting fascism and promoting social justice. Still, he was too much of an individualist to ever officially join the party. But the lines were blurry. Even while being considered for the nation's most secret project, he continued to see Jean Tatlock, rekindling their affair. These meetings, tailed by the FBI because of Tatlock's known communist status, would become a critical vulnerability in his security file. By the early 1940s, the world of physics was taking a terrifying turn. In 1938, German chemists split the uranium atom. Nuclear fission was real. A weapon of unimaginable power was now possible. For refugee scientists in America, the fear was real. What if Hitler's physicists built an atomic bomb first? The political storm on the horizon was about to merge with the storm in the world of physics. And the once apolitical professor from Berkeley was standing right in its path. As America entered World War II, the idea of an atomic bomb went from a theoretical curiosity to a matter of urgent national security. Spurred by a letter from Albert Einstein, the US government launched a top-secret endeavor, the Manhattan Project. It was a massive undertaking, but its heart, the place where the bomb would be designed, needed a leader. The man in charge, General Leslie Groves, had just finished building the Pentagon. He was a gruff, no-nonsense engineer, and his choice for scientific director was, too many, completely baffling, J. Robert Oppenheimer. On paper, Oppenheimer was a terrible candidate. He was a theorist with little practical experience. He'd never run anything. He didn't have a Nobel Prize. And his personal life was a security officer's nightmare, full of communist ties. But Groves saw something else. He saw a man with a self-consuming ambition and an intellect so sharp it could grasp every single piece of the puzzle, from metallurgy to neutron physics. Groves took a huge gamble, brushed aside the security concerns, and in November 1942, made Oppenheimer the director of the secret weapons lab. Oppenheimer's first move was to choose a location, a remote, sun-scorched mesa in New Mexico he knew from his youth, called Los Alamos. It was the perfect secret city. On that dusty plateau, a town and laboratory rose out of nothing, growing from a few hundred people to over 6,000 at Los Alamos. The notoriously impatient teacher transformed into an inspirational director. His charisma was electric. He recruited the world's top scientific minds, Hans Bethe, Enrico Fermi, Richard Feynman, convincing them to move to a secret town in the desert for a project he could only hint at. He also knew that this collection of geniuses couldn't be managed by military rules. Against the demands of General Groves, who wanted strict compartmentalization, Oppenheimer fought for open collaboration. He started weekly colloquia where everyone, from department heads to junior physicists, could share ideas and solve problems. Together, he knew it was the only way to win the race. He was the intellectual hub of the entire project. He could walk into a meeting on plutonium alloys and contribute, then move to the theoretical division and debate the physics of implosion. As Hans Bethe later said, Oppenheimer was the intellectual leader of the laboratory. He wasn't just an administrator. He was the project's brain. The challenge was immense. They were designing two different bombs. Little Boy used a simple gun-like mechanism to slam two pieces of enriched uranium together. They were so confident it would work, they didn't even think it needed a test. The second design, Fat Man, was a different beast entirely. It used plutonium, a highly unstable element, and relied on a radical, unproven method called implosion. This meant surrounding a hollow sphere of plutonium with perfectly shaped explosives. When detonated, the explosives had to crush the core with perfect symmetry, squeezing it into a supercritical state. It was an engineering nightmare. If the squeeze was even slightly uneven, the bomb would fizzle. For 2 years, under Oppenheimer's relentless drive, the men and women of Los Alamos worked around the clock. He had found the one project big enough to contain his restless mind. He was building a weapon to end the war. But with every calculation, he was also leading humanity down a path with no exit. Asterisk, by the summer of 1945, the implosion device, the gadget, was ready. But it was so complex, no one knew for sure if it would work. They had to test it. The site was a desolate patch of New Mexico desert, Oppenheimer codenamed Trinity, possibly a nod to a John Donne poem his former love, Jean Tatlock, had shared. With him, the date was set for July 16th. As the day approached, the tension was unbearable. The gadget, a 5-ton steel sphere covered in wires, was carefully hoisted atop a 100-foot steel tower, a lone sentinel in the vast desert. But the night of July 15th brought a new enemy, a violent thunderstorm. The test was delayed. General Groves fumed. Oppenheimer, gaunt and chain-smoking, grew visibly tense. Finally, the project's meteorologist predicted a small window of clear weather around 5:30 a.m. They would take it. The final countdown began. In a control bunker, his face lit by the green glow of instruments, Oppenheimer held onto a post to steady himself. At precisely 5 hours, 29 minutes and 45 seconds a.m., the world changed forever. First, a flash of light. Not just a flash, a light brighter than 1,000 suns that seemed to erase the sky. Even miles away, observers felt a sudden wave of heat on their faces. For a moment, dead silence, as light outran sound. Then, the roar. A deafening blast that echoed off the mountains. A physical force that knocked men to the ground. The steel tower was gone, vaporized. In its place, a churning ball of fire rose from the desert floor, changing colors from purple to orange to an angry red. It climbed higher and higher, pulling up a massive column of dust before mushrooming into the iconic, terrifying cloud that would define the new age. It soared to around 40,000 feet, turning the sand below into a glassy green crust later named Trinitite. The men who saw it were a mix of awe, relief, and a deep, gut-wrenching dread. Some laughed, some cried. Oppenheimer's brother, Frank, saw his face relax into a look of tremendous relief. Their first thought was simple: it worked. But for Robert Oppenheimer, the relief was fleeting. The sheer world-altering violence of what he had just unleashed settled upon him. His mind reached for a line he'd read years before from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, where the god Vishnu reveals his ultimate form to a prince, urging him to do his duty. Years later, Oppenheimer described the moment with haunting clarity. "We knew the world would not be the same," he said. "I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, 'Now I am become Death, the destroyer of worlds.' I suppose we all thought that, one way or another, this wasn't a boast, it was a confession. He had done his duty, but in doing so, he had become an agent of unimaginable destruction. He had given humanity a power once reserved for gods. And in the blinding light of Trinity, Oppenheimer saw not just the end of a war, but the dawn of a terrifying new age he himself had created. The success at Trinity was cabled to President Harry Truman in Potsdam, Germany. The message was cryptic. Operated on this morning. Results seem satisfactory and already exceed expectations. The atomic bomb was now a terrible new card to play in the final act of World War II. The decision to use it rested with Truman. With an invasion of Japan projected to cost hundreds of thousands of American lives, the bomb seemed like a way to force a quick end to the war. The choice was grim, but to Truman and his advisors, it felt necessary. On August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay dropped the uranium bomb, Little Boy, on Hiroshima. 3 days later, with Japan still not surrendering, the plutonium bomb Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki. The destruction was absolute. 2 cities were vaporized. Over 200,000 people died, either instantly or from the slow, agonizing effects of radiation. Back at Los Alamos, the reaction was complicated. According to eyewitnesses, when the news of Hiroshima broke, Oppenheimer walked into an auditorium to a storm of applause. He reportedly clasped his hands over his head like a prizefighter, telling the crowd his only regret was not finishing the bomb in time to use it on Germany. But this public show of victory hid a deep and growing horror. The numbers and calculations had become images of burnt bodies and shadows seared onto stone. He was the father of the atomic bomb, and he was now haunted by his monstrous creation. The change in him was stark. In a meeting that would become infamous, he confessed to President Truman, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman, who never lost a night's sleep over the decision, was furious. He later told an aide he never wanted to see that crybaby scientist again. This moment marked Oppenheimer's transformation. He became a leading voice for international control of atomic energy. He helped write the Acheson-Linethal Report, a bold plan to create an international agency to control all nuclear materials, ensuring they were only used for peace. The goal was simple: to stop the arms race before it could even begin by taking the ingredients for bombs away from every nation. But the Cold War was setting in. The Soviet Union, paranoid about America's nuclear monopoly, rejected the plan. Oppenheimer's dream of a world free from nuclear terror died. He had built a weapon to end one war, only to watch it become the centerpiece of a new, colder one. The man hailed as a hero was now tormented by the fear that he had, in fact, become the destroyer of worlds. After the war, Oppenheimer wasn't just a scientist, he was a celebrity. As director of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton and chairman of the General Advisory Committee to the Atomic Energy Commission, AEC. His voice carried enormous weight, but that power made him dangerous enemies. The late 1940s were poisoned by the anti-communist paranoia of the Red Scare. Oppenheimer's past associations made him an easy target. More importantly, he was now using his powerful voice to oppose the next leap in the arms race, the hydrogen bomb. When the Soviets tested their own atomic bomb in 1949, panic swept Washington. Men like Edward Teller, a former colleague, and Lewis Strauss, a powerful AEC commissioner, demanded a crash program to build a hydrogen bomb 1,000 times, more powerful than Hiroshima's. Oppenheimer was horrified. He called the H-bomb a weapon of genocide. He argued that a security strategy based on such weapons would only lead to mutual destruction. This put him in direct conflict with powerful men, especially Lewis Strauss. Strauss, a former investment banker, developed a deep personal dislike for Oppenheimer. He resented Oppenheimer's easy intellect and influence. For Strauss, Oppenheimer's opposition to the H-bomb wasn't a moral standard, was borderline treason. The animosity deepened after Oppenheimer publicly embarrassed Strauss during a congressional hearing. Strauss never forgot it. Driven by personal hatred and political paranoia, Strauss orchestrated Oppenheimer's downfall. He had the FBI tap his phones and track his movements, twisting his past into a narrative of disloyalty. In late 1953, Strauss went to President Eisenhower with a file on Oppenheimer. Eisenhower ordered a blank wall be placed between Oppenheimer and the nation's secrets. Oppenheimer was given a choice: resign quietly or face a security hearing. Believing in his innocence, he chose the hearing. It wasn't a trial, but it was designed to destroy him. It was a kangaroo court. Oppenheimer's lawyers couldn't even get the security clearance to see the evidence against him. Meanwhile, the prosecutor, Roger Rubb, had access to illegally recorded FBI wiretaps, which he used to humiliate Oppenheimer on the stand. His life was picked apart. His relationship with Jean Tatlock, his donations to left-wing causes, the Chevalier incident, a confusing story he'd told years earlier about a potential Soviet approach, was now painted as a tissue of lies. The most devastating blows came from his own colleagues. General Groves said that under the new, stricter rules, he couldn't clear Oppenheimer today. The final nail in the coffin came from Edward Teller, asked if Oppenheimer was a security risk. Teller replied with calculated cruelty, "I would like to see the vital interests of this country in hands which I understand better, and therefore trust more." It was the ultimate betrayal. The board voted 2-1 to revoke his clearance. They found him loyal, but declared him a security risk because of defects in his character. The final decision, pushed by Strauss, came down on June 29, 1954. The day before his contract was set to expire, one last, calculated twist of the knife. The man who gave America the atomic bomb was now officially unfit to be trusted with its secrets. Asterisk. The story of Oppenheimer is a tangle of genius, ambition, and regret. So was he a hero who ended a war, a tragic victim of politics, or something far more complicated? Let us know what you think his real legacy is in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history. Asterisk. The 1954 hearing was a public crucifixion. It broke something in J. Robert Oppenheimer. He retreated from public life, a political exile in his own country. He continued his work at Princeton, but the fire had gone out. He was a man living under a permanent shadow. In 1963, in a move meant to right a historic wrong, he was chosen to receive the Enrico Fermi Award, the AEC's highest honor. The award was approved by President Kennedy before his assassination and presented by President Johnson. It was a symbolic pardon, but the damage was done. Oppenheimer, a lifelong heavy smoker, died of throat cancer on February 18, 1967. He was 62. His wife, Kitty, scattered his ashes at sea off the coast of St. John in the Virgin Islands, a place where they had found some peace. The real story of Oppenheimer isn't about a hero or a villain. It's about a flawed, brilliant man pushed onto the world stage by history. He led a scientific triumph that helped end a global war, but unleashed a force that would haunt him and all of us forever. His tragedy was that he saw the future he had created with terrifying clarity, the future of endless arms races and the threat of nuclear apocalypse, and was powerless to stop it. He was a modern Prometheus who stole fire from the gods and, as punishment, was chained to a rock of guilt and regret for the rest of his life. His story is more than a biography. It's a permanent, cautionary tale, and it leaves us with a question we still haven't answered. How do we live in the world that Oppenheimer built? How do we control the fire he gave us without letting it consume us all?